Thank you very much, Adrian, and hopefully everybody's been having a great day. I'd now like to invite the panelists to come up. Robin Adamson is Director of Business Development with Canadian Solar, in charge of microgrid and hybrid solutions. Tony Lord, who's Director, Asset and Energy Management with New Gold. Andy Cruz, who's Vice President for Business Development with Homer Energy. And Thomas Vestensen, who's CEO of Danvest Group. And I'm going to join, actually, it looks like it might be a little bit, Thomas, would you like to sit there maybe, and I can stay up here if that gives you a bit more room, or we can do it that way. So obviously the topic for this afternoon is adapting renewables to miners' power's demand, and we've heard a lot today about the mining industry and the influence of energy, and in particular renewable energy, to meet mining loads. What I'd like to do is maybe invite each of the panelists to give a bit of an introduction on themselves and some opening comments. So why don't we start with Thomas, you at the far left?
Yeah. So I'm the CEO of Danvest, and we introduced our low-load diesel plant to the market in '94 to make wind diesel and solar diesel with high penetration. Today, we in Australia have a focus on the mining sector together with one of the large wind turbine suppliers and a Japanese investment house to make large-scale wind diesel with high penetration, and then also offer PPA solutions. Next to that, we have a focus on solar diesel as well with our low-load diesel plant. And we have lately introduced a new low-cost product in small size to make solar diesel high penetration solutions for mining camps, etc.
Great, thank you very much. Andy, do you want to go next?
Yes, so my name is Andy Cruz. I'm Vice President of Business Development for Homer Energy. We're a software platform that's really technology agnostic. We're about trying to understand least cost solutions. So when you look at any place in the world, and we provide the information like how much solar is there, how much wind is there, and you add in your loads, you look at what technology you want to use, and we just look, the output will come out, what's the least cost options for that location in terms of an IRR or levelized cost of energy. It's used in a lot of different ways. It's used in 193 countries. We got over 160,000 people have downloaded and used our software. So it's really the industry standard when it comes to design optimization for microgrids and also DER applications.
Great. Tony?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. My name's Tony Lord, and as Paul said, not all Australians are scary, so hopefully I'm not one of them. I'm part of the New Gold organisation. I've been fortunate to be part of New Gold since it was formed in 2008. I have a background in mining of 31 years. In fact, I was originally an exploration driller at the Tanami mine underground. So I joined New Gold in Toronto in January as the Director of Asset and Energy Management. Before that, I had a role in business development. I've had roles in compliance and governance, health, safety, environment, and as I said before that, underground mining. I suppose throughout my career, 31 years in the industry, my focus has been on change management, and I think renewables and the future. That's certainly our big challenge in the change management space. So I look forward to the dialogue and having these three guys bash me up.
Great, thank you very much. And last but not least, Robin.
Robin Adamson, I'm the Director of Business Development for the Microgrid and Hybrid Solutions Group for Canadian Solar. We're a new division within Canadian Solar, and much less concerned with selling modules than we are in creating good projects at work. We manage the dance between multiple points of generation, storage, and have been creating some interesting waves in our own company. So some projects up north, we support projects in Africa, Australia, Central America, South America, and constantly looking at suppliers like Danvest and Homer and good minds to work with.
Thank you very much, Robin. Maybe we'll start actually from the miner's perspective. Tony, if we could start with you. I mean, I think it would be helpful if we could set a sort of level set some of the challenges experienced from a mining industry standpoint. I mean, certainly cost, reliability, meeting various load requirements, capacity factors and whatnot. What are some of the challenges that you see today as one of the key drivers from an energy perspective facing the mining industry?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Look, to pick up, we've heard already today a lot of good stuff around costs and efficiencies. To pick up on the presentation just before we had the break, around that natural tension between costs and reducing our carbon footprint. We want to be the most cost effective. For us now, and I think I speak for all of the industry, we are committed to change and to the right social responsibility profile, particularly around carbon and energy. Challenges for us, permitting, and that's more than just in the energy space. Planning, and that then has a direct impact on the footprint, the size of the renewable energies infrastructure that may or may not be put in. The geography and the distance to supply is huge. There's a lot of discussion going on around today around microgrids. So you will find the industry is more and more interested in that particularly. Commodity prices, balancing commodity prices and life of mine, particularly when we're talking about long-term take or pay PPAs. Right? Sometimes the fluctuations in commodity prices, our life of mine can change drastically overnight. Capital costs, storage. So if we do put renewable energy solutions in, then how do we store the energy for a 24/7 reliable that can fluctuate between the fluctuating loads and also deliver our base load for grinding particularly? Dwayne talked earlier about grinding and crushing. It is a big fluctuation. Carbon taxes, we've had a great dialogue before around that. We are also working on CO2 internal costs, carbon internal costing. Fuel prices, carbon taxes, what's happening cap and trade. I was part of an industry in Australia when we did have the 2 years of tax price, and it had a major impact. So yeah, I think that they probably listed off the major challenges.
Mm-hmm. And maybe from the other's perspective, in terms of solution providers to some of these challenges, maybe if each of you could describe your particular perspectives on right-fitting solutions to meet some of those challenges. Maybe Thomas, would you like to start?
Yeah, so we have, of course, intensely studied that and studied how we could convince miners to adopt renewables, and in particular our low-load diesel and wind or solar. And we have understood the problem. So, of course, technically, the solution we have is similar to a ordinary diesel power station. So you have that robustness that matches what else you normally have at a mine site. But then there's this issue of the capital cost of the renewable. So we make high penetration. So that means we want to put a very large solar system or a very or larger wind farm, and the capital cost of that and that expense or that put on a PPA towards a mine that is struggling to accept a long-term agreement. So that we have certainly seen, and then we also know that some of the IPPs that already work in the sector, they offer cancellation terms in their PPA agreements, and I understand that is very nice to have. But how can you offer a cancellation clause in a PPA when you put up a large solar system or a large wind farm? So how we are tackling it is, as I see it, it's about making cost-effective solutions, so low-cost solutions. So bring cost of solution as far down as possible. And of course, the price of solar and price of wind is assisting that. And then instead of putting many guarantees on performance on top of system, that makes system very expensive, I think one should have a very low cost look at it or approach, so it's similar to the diesel power station that may already have been at the mine site, and then your payback is very short. And when payback is short, then I think miners can go into this. So that's some of the things we are looking at. And what we lately are also looking at a lot is how to make a PPA that fits the mining sector. And here it's of course about finding investors that can accept the risk, accept the return which is acceptable for such projects, and then structure the PPA so the risks are assumed correctly, so the PPA is not reflecting a far more expensive system. Anyway, that's some of the challenges.
Andy, what are your thoughts?
You know, coming from our software perspective, looking at Thomas's or Robin's technology, you know, what we do is we help them communicate with the mining company, with, you know, that you look at a particular project and you're trying to understand what's the least cost or least risk solution. Looking at all the different technologies out there, even you can simulate, you know, where you're going with it. You know, what happens when diesel prices go up by 25%, or what happens if the cost of solar goes down, or what happens if the Danvest technology, they expand the warranty by 3 or 4 years. All these have an impact on a particular project. So looking at a project before it's built, understanding what the costs are, what the risks are, modeling that is absolutely vital to understanding. So when you go to a mine and they're looking at driving their costs down, this is where you start. You start with simulation, you start with optimization, you decide, does the Danvest technology, does it make the most sense in that location? Yes, then at least you know going forward that, you know, you're not going to be regretting that investment down the road because all of a sudden something else came out. Because this is what we do, is to help answer those questions about how much of what is going to give you that best return on investment.
Mm-hmm. And Robin, I know you've been very involved in the mining sector as well. How do you see the integration of your technologies in with the mining loads and how that's being made successful?
Well, I think that we probably haven't been as successful as we'd like to be. And I'm struck by some of the comments that people made earlier in sessions and on panels. I think in some ways we approach these things in isolation. Danvest has got terrific technology. We've been looking at that for some time. Homer's got terrific technology. We understand the needs of miners as they've been expressed. One of the themes that came through for me most clearly in listening to the earlier sessions was that we find ourselves at the crossroads of trying to make these projects work. There was I think it was Declan that was talking about the fact that a mine was being built, and that part of the solution was to look at the installation that was going to be renewable energy in conjunction with a nearby community's needs. And that's the point that we keep trying to drive home. We understand that a solar installation is not movable, in many ways. Moving those panels or modules is going to void the warranties on those kinds of things. So we try to work with it from the sense of holistically looking at this. Is there a partner that we can bring to the table, whether it's in Africa, Australia, Northern Canada? How do we begin to help the mine defray some of the initial CapEx costs by saying, okay, you've got a 10-year life of mine, but we've got a 300-year life of community that's sitting beside. Can we, in fact, begin to work with you with those communities, to be able to build out a solution that makes some sense? So for us, it's an interesting kind of dilemma. We can go and use all of these technologies, and we can provide numbers on diesel offset, on efficiency, on dealing with intermittency. Getting to the miners' needs in seeing diesel as an operating expense primarily versus a capital expense, and how we address that bridge often involves other elements that are much trickier to manage. And that's part of what we've been trying to manage with Indian and Northern Affairs in Canada and other government agencies.
And Tony, just to come back, I mean, you talked about carbon costs as being, let's call it an externality that's having an effect in terms of the price, as well as, you know, I would imagine the diesel costs and trying to get into some, you know, communities is escalating. That's becoming more challenging. But I know a lot of us have read more about electrification of mining loads and whatnot. So the world is changing. The load profile is shifting a little bit. Maybe you could comment a little bit about that in terms of how things are evolving, and from a, you know, cost, some of the big drivers, if it's carbon pricing or if it's an actual reshaping of the load profile to allow for more electrification and those types of things.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Look, there are a number of drivers. I think one of the important ones is just burning fossil fuel willy-nilly is no longer acceptable. There's some fantastic work being done by one of my peer companies here in Canada with electrifying a mine. There's an amazing amount of work being done by other peers with regards to changing their generation techniques where they've got their own generators. We heard Frank talk about some of that before, even if it's just fuel change. The carbon prices or taxes, they are definitely on our radar. We heard Mike talk before about a company that he had experience with where it wasn't important. I don't think there are many companies out there now that are like that. I think they've all realised in one fashion or another that the world is changing. Recently we looked at putting an electric shovel in one of our pits in a new operation that we're building. The reality is the pit design, we were going to be propelling that shovel all of the time. Those shovels are most effective when they're in the dirt digging, not walking around dragging cables around. So, you know, we do have challenges, and again, some of that's all related around commodity prices, change the shape of pits. Mm-hmm. The industry is definitely committed to doing something different. You know, from a social responsibility, from a sustainability point of view, carbon price is going to be a problem for us because it's going to lift our unit costs. If we've got to pay unit costs somewhere else, something else will slip. Social responsibility is the one thing that none of us in the industry will tolerate slipping. We all have different levels of application of it, but certainly we're all committed to it and to doing the right thing. At the moment, higher unit costs, smaller mines, shorter life of mine. That's probably the simplest way to put it. But holding it to our heads as a gun isn't the way to go, you know, through regulation. I think Frank put it probably the best I've heard earlier when he talked about that tax. Fine, if you're going to tax us, then put it back in innovation. Don't put it in revenue generation. So yeah, the carbon price is not the gun that we hold to our own heads.
And Tony, you mentioned at the tail end, you know, put it back into innovation, which is actually a great segue. And maybe Andy, you could speak to, you know, is the innovation from an energy standpoint keeping pace to what the miners' needs are, anticipating some of those, you know, things like mitigating carbon prices or carbon taxes, looking to how technology can adapt to meet the load requirements as they're moving forward. Is the industry keeping pace with some of those changes in your view?
From our side in analyzing different technologies that are coming to our platform, not quite yet. On the controller side, yes. I think storage still has a ways to go, but we're seeing huge leaps, and I cannot believe every time I turn around, there's a new advancement in storage or the reliability of the technology. I think it's getting there. There's a lot of moving parts. There's the finance side. How do you finance multiple pieces of technology in one project? You know, how do you spread out that risk amongst the technology? Are these technologies large enough to handle a bankability study? You know, are they too unstable financially? There's a lot of questions still that are arising, but I've been doing this for 30 years, and I could go back to the late 90s when they were trying to figure out how to build reliable inverters, you know, that are grid connected, that would fit the needs of the utility, or the first PPAs that were coming out in the early 2000s, you know, and how that would work. This is just an emerging technology, and I think it's fast approaching. We don't have the threat of really expensive oil, so there might not be as much driving it as rapidly, but I think that it's coming along very, very quickly, and I think probably in the next 10, 12 years, we'll see very, very inexpensive batteries, way more reliable than they are even today. We're going to see low-load diesel systems as a norm, not just as an alternative technology to standard diesel. I think we're going to see a lot of these changes, and it's going to meet their needs, despite carbon requirements.
Right. And Thomas, you've had, I know, experience in wind diesel hybrid applications. Looking at those, but also looking at storage, different types of storage, solar PV, other kinds of applications. Obviously, the price curves on some of those have shifted dramatically. We've seen a lot of digression in solar. Storage could follow the same kind of trends. How do you see that sort of hybrid nature of different technologies coming together to meet both intermittency challenges, but also some of the challenges that Andy mentioned about bankability, commercialization?
Yeah, first of all, we see price of equipment going down, and we ourselves have a strategy to continuously or periodically have a cost down projects to bring price of low-load diesel product or plant down to be very competitive. So I think in this industry and anyway the competition, and there's so many technologies being presented. So there is a great competition so that will force prices to continue down. I think somehow though that there is a large spread of various technologies offered. So I could imagine that miners, when they have an idea to implement a hybrid solution, then I could imagine there's many different solutions, and I could suspect that, okay, so which one of them to choose, and then again I think that what Homer is developing, this is a uniform way to analyze the hybrids, and that is really benefiting. You can put them up against each other and say, okay, in your situation there's these possibilities, and this one is those two are sort of the best ones, and there you make a good choice. So I think all in all the tools is starting to be there, and it's starting to be an easy choice for the miners to choose that solution that fits to them.
Yeah. And maybe, Robin, if I could ask you, particularly on solar, but also maybe storage, other technologies as well, and maybe looking at it specifically from a Canadian perspective, and maybe, Andy, your thoughts on this as well. Are there variations from a Canadian mining, like a northern community perspective, that need to be thought about? Do we see certain trends here that are different than in other places? What's best for mining loads, particularly in a Canadian context?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't think that technology is the issue. Neither do I think that mines are the issue. I think that probably what is the issue is that we don't have a viable or correct financial model that fits mines. And I think that extends to the supports that the federal government has or has not, offered to achieve some of the goals. And I'm thinking particularly of the market roiling when the ITCs were threatened to be removed in the United States, or the maker's straight line 5-year depreciation. I think that those, when you saw Congress in the U.S. threaten to take ITC away, the marketplace dove in terms of renewables. And as soon as they extended the ITCs, the market came right back up. I'm not sure that we have the right mix of financial models around the world to satisfy either the cost of renewables or the needs of the mining industry. I don't see the mining industry saying, we don't want renewables. What I hear them saying loud and clear is, we can't figure out how to make it make sense financially. And I think that's a legitimate concern. All of the other issues, I mean, we, at Canadian Solar, in our division, we support projects and RFPs and RFQs right around the world. We can put a reasonable mix of technology on the table. 9 times out of 10, if the project doesn't move forward, it's because a thermal engineer has said, we can do this cheaper, even with the cost of diesel. So obviously, we're not at that point yet where we're able to make full sense of how to make these projects, pencil out properly. I think that, and this is something we've, argued loud and clear with CANSIA, why don't we have an ITC? Why don't we have a maker's straight line 5-year depreciation on these kinds of projects? We can bring multiple chemistries to the table to satisfy the most arcane requirements of any mine or any installation. We can make use of low-load diesels. We can make use of the software and make those things kind of make sense. What we haven't done is come up with a financial model that suits your needs in a specific kind of way. I'll give you an example. I mean, we're talking about movable solar situations, light source, saying that they would come in and be able to recover the PV arrays. Well, for us, from a warranty perspective, if we're offering a 25-year warranty on the performance of our modules, the minute that you disrupt that array, our warranty, kind of ends. So to some degree, we can't guarantee that they'll be handled properly. We can't guarantee that the performance on a reinstallation will be reasonable. All of those good bits and pieces. So we need to somehow figure out how to make a 10-year life of mine work. We can make it work technically. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, on one of our small up north communities, on a 0.5 megawatt, 310 kilowatt battery, we're saving 22% of their diesel load. That's $450,000 a year. I mean, that's not nothing. And if they expand that, out to a meg or a meg and a half, all of a sudden we've got them in business. So we know that the numbers work on a long-term basis. It's trying to shorten that period of time and find a financial model that encourages the installation. And I think you'll see mines, adopting it left, right, and center.
Yeah. Andy, your purview?
It's fascinating. I listened to Robin because I would think back again, back in history a little bit, 2006 and stuff like it. This was a big question, how do we finance these projects? A big solar project back then was, 50 kilowatts or 75 kilowatts, and there's a few, I remember one was a record, it was a 3 megawatt project in eastern Arizona. But today it's a very different picture, and I think it's just time. I was here at this conference last year. There was one big discussion. One point was, well, the average life of a mine is 10 years. These PPAs need to be 20 years before they make sense. So what do we do with that asset? What happens afterwards? And there's a lot of, how do we do it? This year, I hear there's at least 3 companies here that make systems, PV systems that you can move, that you can erect, operate, and remove. Now, of course, Robin's got a good point. I can't guarantee the performance of that panel on the next time. So that's another one of those hurdles we got to understand. How do we do this? How do we make sure that all that remains in place going forward? This is not insurmountable at all. These are all solvable challenges that we have, and we're working our way through this maze. And granted, microgrids are a lot more complicated than a standard PV system, but it's getting there. And I think with technology, with creative finance, it's going to take that one person that takes the risk, that says, I'm going to finance this, and then it works. And then everybody else, that's kind of what Sun Edison in many ways did in the 2000s. They took the first risk, and it worked. And now the world is different when it comes to financing renewables. So I think we're going to see that again. This is, for microgrids and DER, this is 2004. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to see something really evolve in the next 10 years.
And certainly I know this is a renewables-focused discussion, so Adrian, don't get mad, but what about storage? Like, are we seeing, obviously we've seen a big change in the PV market. There's been wind applications on a small scale basis. What are we seeing in storage, particularly for the mining industry? Is it the same kind of issues?
Yes, so looking at, in a similar application to mining in a much smaller application was forward operating bases, military bases in rural area. A lot of them are just diesel only, and all of a sudden they started putting storage into a diesel system, and all of a sudden they started seeing 30 and 40% savings on diesel fuel. Just adding storage in a lot of these episodes where you're using diesel, especially in smaller mining applications, this can make a significant impact, or Danvest technology as well. It can, if you do it right, if you design it right, you could save a lot. You know, the focus originally in these mines were just drop in that power system, operate it, we don't care what, we need to dig that gold or whatever we're going after. And so now it's changing. We're trying to be more efficient throughout the whole system, and that's what's evolving. Storage in many different ways is evolving, from advanced lead acid to lithium to flow batteries. These are all evolving. It's kind of, I call it sort of a horse race. And there's not going to be one winner. There's going to be several winners depending on what they are. And Danvest is going to have a location, a place. A lot of the other technologies that are out there, they're going to have their place as well.
Yeah. And so, you know, I think that it challenges us to think about not only what's happening today, but also where are things heading in the future. And maybe Thomas, you know, right now I know a lot of work, and actually to Andy's point, I mean, even if you look at battery technology, a lot of it has evolved. Where do you think we're going to be in 5, 10 years? Where do you see the innovations sort of going forward in terms of technology, in terms of how hybrid solutions come together? And it's something that I might ask of everybody, but maybe if Thomas, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. If we start with the renewable assets, of course I see solar coming further down in price, and then I see that people accept that it can be moved around, and solutions for that is being found. Then I have had some interesting discussions. What about wind turbines? Will they also start to fit the mining market sort of with a small foundation, and still being very tall, so it can be very effective in a low wind scenario? Yeah, but then many say, yeah, but if the number of turbines that the mining industry will buy is a good number, but it's smaller, so you probably won't develop a particular turbine for that. So, but what I think you will see is you will see a lot of wind turbines where there's wind resource, and you will see a lot of solar where there's no wind resource and there's a good solar resource. And then I see low-load diesel becoming the norm, and then I see very much step-by-step integration of storage. But at this stage, I think what you see, you need to create solution that sort of builds around the capabilities of the battery, so you optimize the cycles you can get out of the battery. So that's what I see at the moment. But then moving further on, I see a storage solution more being solution where you switch energy from solar to night. But obviously, I also think that miners will start adopting their consumption possibly more to what the renewable can offer. So if they have a solar solution, they could twist their consumption more towards the day hours.
Mm-hmm. Robin, would you agree? Do you see the same trends happening in the future?
To a large extent. I think that the difference is that at some point, the Walmarting of solar and wind is going to have a negative effect. We're not going to be able to support the kind of research and development that's necessary. I think storage is going to be in a similar position. There's a finite level at which you can reach before things start to implode, and unfortunately Sun Edison is a good example of that. For those of you who don't know, Canadian Solar is a large company, and we have a large footprint around the world. We have the benefit of seeing a number of emerging technologies long before they get to the marketplace. So we're really quite encouraged by the fact that more and more is coming into the marketplace, like Danvest and like Homer, that makes our job much easier. I think on the storage side, in particular, we see some massive movements. One of the companies in the marketplace is currently down to $168 a watt, which is an extraordinary price. You've got to add on the extras, et cetera, but their base price over the next 2 years is $168 a watt. We haven't seen that. Tesla's been talking about 220, but by 2020. There are a lot of changes that will make that a key part of a microgrid in terms of dealing with the intermittency problems of both wind and solar and smoothing things out. We're currently involved in an IESO demonstration project on frequency regulation with Hydro Ottawa, 4 megawatt, 2.75 megawatt battery sitting on its own, acting as a frequency regulation resource. IESO has come out and put out an RFI on capacity reserve. So you'll see storage coming in at larger utility scales that will have direct application to some of the mining operations in terms of giving you high quality power that's dependable. And that's the kind of work that we're doing on the control side with our partners in the business. I'll make mention of the fact now that by the end of December, we'll have the first, I believe the first commercial microgrid test center in operation in Guelph with all of the various elements so that we can actually begin to model out applications, various kinds of chemistry, various kinds of diesel interactions, wind, solar, load banks, ultracapacitors, things of that nature, and be able to give a proof of concept before it ever hits ground or even in final financials. So that's the, and we're doing that with the support of the Ontario government and various other, partners. That kind of stuff for us is absolutely critical in understanding where microgrids are going, not only in mining, but in commercial and industrial applications, utility scale, all of those good bits and pieces. And as we look at our mining outings in Africa on a couple of gold mines, we're very clear that thermal generation is still, I guess, the generation type of source. And even though the solar resource is there in terms of irradiance, we've got good batteries, all of those kinds of things. Again, it comes down to how do we protect the operating assets of companies like Canadian Solar or Trina or any of the other big ones that are out there to enable that kind of looking forward into new applications, new solutions, and new ways of doing it. So we need to partner with the financial community, quite frankly, in terms of how to make these things work.
Mm-hmm. Tony, you're the customer. So is any of this of interest? Do you see opportunity in the future?
Oh, absolutely, Chris, and I'm sure my industry peers agree. We know that our mines are all, very few of us are fortunate enough to have a mine on the back doorstep of a large rural or regional centre or city. Most of them are in the middle of the outback, whether it's in Sub-Sahara or Northern Ontario or wherever. So geography, that's always going to be the same. We're hearing a lot more around the way PPAs are structured, and so the way that we would pay for the unit. And I'm excited by what I've heard today around the finance models need to be adjusted, and I'm sure that we'll move forward in the next 5 to 10 years with that. Certainly, that'll change capital cost. I'm excited by what I'm hearing about storage, because the reality is if we have a big mill or we end up with a mill and a winder fire up at the same time, even the big national grids struggle. We've normally got to ring them up and tell them we're going to bring 2 pieces of plant on at the same time. So, carbon taxes or whatever they want to be called, they're always going to be there. And if they're not there in that fashion, they'll be called something else. They're always going to be there. Right? So we know that carbon is something that we need to do something differently. Again, I think the carbon taxes needs to be fueling that R&D that you've just talked about, Robin, that's going to be lacking there. I see renewables and the storages and all of the different mixes coming together. I'm really pleased about this suite that sits in between all of the different suppliers, because it is a little bit like Walmart and Home Depot at the moment, honestly, guys. A bit overwhelmed here today. But somebody who can help us choose the best mix of what's red, what's white, what's blue, that's important for the industry, I think. Mm-hmm. We're in the business of mining, metals out of the ground. We're not in the business of generating power. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be doing that. But one important thing, I think, is overcoming the warranty issue. because, and Donald talked about it earlier this morning, we don't want to just go in there and leave a big hole in the ground. If there are communities, Indigenous or otherwise, First Nations or otherwise, if there are communities that can benefit from what we leave behind, then that's important too. But the last thing they want to be doing is operating a 57 meg or gig diesel power plant at the end of the life of mine. So what we can leave the communities and the regions afterwards is important too. It's exciting.
And no, it is. And Andy, I might put you on the spot a little bit because I think we're pretty much out of time, and I don't know if we have time for questions, and we do not have time for questions. So Andy, you have the last word, but in terms of the excitement and the innovation, I mean, a lot of people comment upon that. It's really quite notable. But if you can think of a couple of highlights, people who are doing it right, or some very exciting innovations that are happening in the market today, and I apologize for putting you on the spot, but does anything come to mind in terms of really looking at a model that people can learn from?
Wow, model. I guess the biggest challenge right now is there's so many systems being developed right now. I'm going to look to Kenya, for example, for a moment. First of all, there's two kinds of microgrids. There's the grid-connected type, which we see here in North America or Canada, and then there's the rural ones. And so segmenting that, the rural ones that we're seeing some tremendous success at NL and other utilities are actually behind financing into these rural areas, so that we're doing energy access. So we're developing microgrids to the people that wouldn't only have electricity. And the technology that goes into that, Power Hive, which does the analysis, system monitoring, and revenue collection, these things didn't exist just a few years ago, and we're going to see that. I think really when it comes to emerging countries evolving their electric grid, we're not going to see the standard centralized power systems, transmission, distribution to the home. That's gone. I think Australia clearly, through some of the brush fires, they learned that lesson that it's actually cheaper to build microgrids than it is to rebuild the power lines. So I think that's going to evolve a lot. And so some of the success stories, we're seeing some of those, a lot of them, and I'm not going to name names because I can't think of it right at the moment, but a lot of is going on in Africa is great. Indonesia, there's a lot of Thousand Island programs that are evolving. And also we're watching these slowly. It's still too early, but what's going on in North America, in New York, for example. We're recognizing that climate and other things are having a severe impact. It costs a lot of money when the electric grid goes down. We need grid resiliency, and so we're going to see that continue. But it's really hard to quantify and bring it all together because there's too many moving parts. It's financing, there's monitoring, there's technology, there's deployment. Those are all happening at the same time, real time, and I think it's going to be exciting. Wherever we are, this is probably the best time you could ever imagine being in the energy sector.
A great way to end the discussion. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, your thoughts, your insights. Very, very impressive conversation, and we're all thankful for you to spend the time with us this afternoon. So thank you again.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. I'll hand it back to Adrian.